Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to be speaking in English, so my excuses. Firstly, I would like to thank Nuqat organization for inviting me. Hassan, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in Kuwait. It's the first time here. So my name is Alexandre, and I'm going to be speaking to you about building possible tomorrows. And before I start talking to you about that, I'm going to share a little teaser about that. We asked people that visited the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, what are their possible tomorrow?
Meu amanhã, ele é com imaginação, cheio de sonhos.
Que as novas gerações reflitam mais e se apropriem mais da cidade.
Eles mudem, né, essa geração, se conscientize, cuidem mais do meio ambiente para que não venha a acabar.
Eu acho que o amanhã possível tem necessariamente que passar pela educação. Dessas coisas maravilhosas que o museu nos apresenta.
O meu amanhã é que tudo que tem hoje, né, de belo na natureza, no planeta, a gente possa conservar.
A minha visão de amanhã é que o amanhã depende do hoje, depende de cada um, depende da forma que nós lemos o mundo hoje.
Meu amanhã é você, eu e você.
A luta pela afirmação dos valores humanistas que estão encarnados no museu, os valores da liberdade, do conhecimento, da tolerância, da alegria. Essa luta será longa, mas ela vai ser travada. Nós estamos aqui.
So, Museum of Tomorrow is a new kind of science museum. But before I get to that, I'm going to bring you a little bit of a notion of science museums. We are a Museum of Applied Sciences. But I like to celebrate the amazing natural history museums. One example of them, the American Museum of Natural History. Amazing museum to show traces of the past, to understand where we come from. There are also the science and technology museums. They're great to present and to show how the laws of nature, the laws of physics, mathematics work. Here's an example of a kid interacting at the Nemo Science Museum in Amsterdam. And there are the museums. It's a trend, it's a global trend of museums that want to promote a shared future. And they are calling themselves Museums of Tomorrow, Museums of the Future. So here are a few examples. The museums, they're not out there yet. They're being built right now. One is the United Nations Live Museum in Copenhagen. It's about to promote the values of the United Nations and also raise awareness on the challenges we face today as humanity. Then we have Biotopia in Munich that wants to trigger or ignite a new way on how we can relate ourselves with nature, reinvent the way we relate to nature. And there's this super cool, amazing Museum of the Future coming up in 2 years in Dubai. Their motto is about see the future, create the future. And then there is the Museum of Tomorrow that was really built upon ethical pillars. Sustainability, how do you expect to live with the planet, and conviviality with each other as people citizens, members of the humankind, and right now, most importantly, as we're in the frontier of space exploration, as Earthlings. And like the UN Life Museum, we are also tackling the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are our guidelines, as well as exploring the frontier of knowledge. And we are a call to action museum, meaning we want to ignite, invite people to take positive action towards their own life and their community. In a broad sense, it's about igniting a global awareness of the challenges we face today as humanity, and also acting locally. So thinking globally, act local. This is one of the most important regions of Rio de Janeiro. It is the birthplace of the city. But for over 50 years, government has been neglecting that area. That harbor, where you see there, it was built for the 1950 World Cup in Brazil. But it was never used to host cruise lines. And it's also home of the first Brazilian favela, the slums of Rio de Janeiro. And also remains, until today, the lowest GDP per capita region neighborhood in Rio. But it's also, it's the birthplace of samba. It has a very sophisticated culture in that region that we acknowledge that we're really privileged to be there. And that picture was taken, that one in 2011, just before the construction of the Museum of Tomorrow. The Museum of Tomorrow, it's a PPP plus P, so public-private partnership for the planet. So we basically had government, the city of Rio. We had corporations, the civil society involved in creating the Museum of Tomorrow. I'm going to briefly talk about the architecture. We had Santiago Calatrava as our designer and architect for the museum. He was inspired by the botanics that he saw at the botanical garden in Rio de Janeiro. That's a bromelia. So he was really inspired by that shape of the bromelia and was able to put up a beautiful vision for the museum. But inside, and that's I'm here to talk to you about the content and the ideas around the Museum of Tomorrow. We use a lot of technology. We're applied science museum, so we use contemporary resources. The latest technology to engage the visitors into a journey of exploration of possible future scenarios. And we work as an organism. We have our head with antennas and everything. The Observatory of Tomorrow, it's what's connecting the museum with many research institutions around the world. We have a research center inside of the museum, but we're not conducting climate research. We're gathering data from NASA, from different agencies that are tracking the vital signs of the Earth. And we're showing that to the public, promoting dialogue, promoting debates, workshops, and bringing that notion to as many people as possible at the museum. We have our hands, our innovation center, the lab, which was designed to prototype a more social and environmental friendly tomorrow using emerging technologies. So we are prototyping that at the lab, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, Internet of Things, 3D printing, electric mobility, and wearables. We prototype that at the museum, and we showcase with an exhibition. Right now, we have a temporary exhibition on artificial intelligence, showing the current applications in our daily lives, and the ones coming up within the next months and years. And the main exhibition was really inspired by a music chord. We had amazing people collaborating with us, artists, designers, to really bring a narrative that promotes a shared future. And from that, we came up with a narrative grounded on questions that humankind has always asked itself. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we now? Where are we heading to? And how do we want to go? So, first experience, it's basically 13.7 billion years of cosmic evolution in a film of 15 minutes. And another way to ask that question is, how did we get to here? And we do not want to answer those questions, but we will show that using rigorous scientific content, but showing in a very lyric and poetic way, because we use art to convey and to present our messages. Who are we? Then we start to explore the dimensions of our existence, going through matter, life, and mind. Where are we now? Then we show evidence that we became a planetary force, altering the composition of the atmosphere, of the oceans, altering the deltas of all the rivers that we know, the big rivers that we are aware of. And in that experience, we really grounded on the notion of the Anthropocene. That's why the experience is called Anthropocene. But it's showing that, if we keep up with that pace, this exponential growth, we might end up having some really hardcore consequences. The Great Acceleration started 70 years ago, meaning the last 70 years, we disrupted the planet more than our whole existence. And that we might have, our actions are now far-reaching. Where we're heading to? This area, it's the heart of the Museum of Tomorrow, because we started, investigating the past, understanding the present, and now it's about imagination, using science, probability, statistics, to show possible future scenarios. So we track major trends. They're macro trends. They're shaping our society. And we show evidence that all those trends and all those that we're shaping tomorrow, they're all connected. So basically, population growth and longevity is one of them. We'll be more, and we'll live longer. It is believed that the first human that's going to live up to 150 years already among us. Maybe it's you, Husa. Extreme climate change. I know you guys don't have this problem here of a lot of rain, but we see dramatic climate events happening almost every day. And that's one thing that we show. Alterations in biodiversity. We show evidence also that we are in the merge of a great extinction, probably in the oceans. And then expansion of knowledge. Then we start to look at really amazing stuff that's happening. There are also really good news. UNESCO released data by the end of 2015 showing that more than half of the world's population is, for the first time in history, able to read and write. And those who know how to read and write, more than half are women, for the first time in history. If you compare that data to 100 years ago, you see that this is a huge advancement. Singularity, another major trend. You know, the fusion between biologic evolution and computational evolution. It's already happening, right? What are we without that today? So we're going to see the increase of artifacts attached to our bodies, and really the rise of potentially a new species. And the last session we have at the main exhibition, it's about how do you want to go? Which values we want to convey in constructing that tomorrow that's not giving. It's not a date in the calendar. It is a collective construction that starts today. So we basically show one single artifact that we have on the museum, because most of the experience we have is digital. So we have an artifact that represents from the Aboriginal culture, a millennial object from the Aboriginal culture that it's used to pass knowledge through generations. So all the values that the museum affirms to the audience is presented in that experience. Back to the present. I want to show you a little bit of the, it's hard to say impact, but some evidence that we are going the right track. We became the most visited museum in Brazil in 2 years. 2.5 million visitors. This is how our everyday looks like. We also show that the building was constructed with using all the most advanced technology in sustainability. So we self-generate our energy through solar panels. So we have wings that move according to the sun's movement. We use the ocean water to work together with our air conditioning system. Yeah, so this is all easily presented to the public. And our exhibitions are also available in Google Arts and Culture platform. It's funny to see that it's not showing the data here, but we had about 100,000 visitors in those exhibitions online, and most of them are coming from the US. We have an online reach of about 7 million people in Brazil. 99% of that audience comes from Brazil. And then we start to see some things that are really important, the importance of a cultural institution. We conducted several surveys, but one of them showed that 48% of our visitors, they're non-museum visitors. They usually do not go to museums. But imagine if let's say that you've never been to a museum. You go for a museum and you had a very good experience. That somehow touched you. You got inspired. You'll be more hungry for that. You want to go to more museums, and you end up forming new audiences. And another really interesting data that we have is that 93% of our visitors leave the museum with a desire to change something in their daily habits, do something good for the planet, for their community, for themselves. I think it's it's not there. But basically, what it says here, the title is not there. It's about advocacy for social value, meaning that in Brazil, I'm going to bring a little bit of context here. In Brazil, we do not have those themes that I just presented you in the agenda of our current politicians. So we have the elections this year in Brazil by October, and we promoted a series of events like these, like the one you're promoting here, Hassa, to talk about those things. We affirm our values when we talk about those things, but we want to be neutral, but a brave space to discuss all those things. And we want to see those topics in the next campaign. It's happening. We're having the current potential candidates going to the museums to discuss those things, to present their views to the Brazilian population on those themes. This one was supposed to say empowering communities. Basically, we were not really aware when we came to that place as a museum of the importance, the cultural importance, the social importance, the economic importance of that region. Like I said, it's home of Brazil's first favela, 30,000 inhabitants, and we understood that we really had to acknowledge the main actors of the territory. Not only acknowledging them as community leaders, but also inviting them first to get to know the museum. So even before the museum was ready, we were taking them in, showing what this thing was going to be, and that they're going to be part of it, even co-curating with us the content of the museum. And then the program that we developed went beyond. After the museum was open, that says entre museums means enter museums. In Portuguese also means in between museums. So we worked with the Secretary of Education in Rio and developed a whole curriculum for students that live specifically on that region on museums. So one day a month, 700 students, not in one day, but in different schools, but the pilot, the prototype we did with 700 students, they have, instead of a day of class, they go to museums. And the curriculum is built upon that. So talk about history, you go to the History Museum. Talk about science, we go to the Museum of Tomorrow. Talk about art, go to the Rio Art Museum. So, and of course, all the children, the kids that participate, they become members of the museums, and they can visit all the museums for free in Rio. And we're also advocating for refugees. It's not a big deal in Brazil yet, but we want to bring this topic in. We work together with different refugees. We employ them to work in the museums. We have exhibitions to show their view on that matter. And that's one. He's from Congo, and he's working with us in our educational team. I think my time is over, but just bringing a little bit of that perception among many others. You realize that if you really want to become one of the planet's most powerful arguments for sustainability, we need to scale. We need to go from a hyper-local activity to a hyper-global one. So we are working on the scalability of the museum. We just opened a new branch office of the Museum of Tomorrow in Amsterdam that is dedicated to reach as many people as possible and inspire a whole generation to care about tomorrow, today. I think that's it. Shukran. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may ask. When I ask how much did it cost the museum, were the companies involved, please. Yeah, sure. The Museum of Tomorrow costed about $150 million. And 90% of the money came from private companies. The government subsidized some of the things, but it was basically the Santander bank, the big Spanish bank, Shell. Now we have, in our partners, we have Cisco, IBM, and other important corporations working together with us.
Hello. Hi. You said that the museum was built in the slums, on the worst areas of Rio. Did you incorporate the residents of that area to be employed, for example, in the museum, or help them to a better life in that area?
Yes. It was not built exactly in the slums, but very near, very close. So for them, of course, imagine them, like, what is this thing being built in my yard, right? We have an agreement with the city of Rio that we have to employ at least 20% of our staff from that region. Right now, we have 40% of our staff from that region. So it's about community building, empowerment. Yes, sure. My background is economics. I'm an economist. I studied in Germany. Went to school in Germany. But I was always a museum passionate. I was really encouraged from the early age to learn at museums. And one of the reasons that I went to study in Germany was because there are so many amazing museums to see. I work with the financial market, commodity, trading sugar, and I work with mining too. And after I learned a bit deeper how the mining extraction works in the Amazon forest, I became really touched and started articulating the Museum of Tomorrow.
How did you sell the idea of the museum from an idea to a reality? Like, how did you convince them of that?
I think there's always a spark. It was not me. I was called upon in a later stage of the museum, but it started with the intention to have like a great cultural center in Rio de Janeiro for the Olympic Games, as a legacy after the Olympic Games. And Rio de Janeiro has this drive for environment. You know, the first big environment conference was in Rio in 1992. And it started as the president of the largest media group in Brazil. He wanted to have the Museum of the Planet, Museum for the Planet. And after many discussions, we came up with the Museum of Tomorrow.
Hi, thank you. Here, up. Up. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. My question is, we see great impact in terms of driving people to visit other museums and changing the, socially developing the area where the museum is. But how do you quantify this impact, especially convincing like great stakeholders and major companies to support this? Because it's a very great idea, but this sort of soft impact, how do you get this buy-in from stakeholders?
Yeah, a great question, thank you. It's hard to measure the impact. I mean, you see a lot of changes. We're currently working with controlled groups to see whether the convival with the Museum of Tomorrow, you know, the fact that this group is frequently going to the Museum of Tomorrow has some impact, some social and economic impact in their lives. So might have an answer in 2 years or so. But we see really amazing things happening at the museum, especially among the stakeholders. We have on our board people that represent big energy companies, such as Engie. It's a big French energy group. They work a lot with renewable energy. And the president of the company said they changed the whole strategic planning of the organization because of the Museum of Tomorrow, the influence that the content of the Museum of Tomorrow had in its board, in its high-level executives, and in its employees. So we start to see some really interesting changes on that matter. Of course, socially in the region and everything, but we're still finding ways to measure the impact, which is, again, something not really easy.
Hello. Thank you, Alexandre, for your very informative presentation. I'm curious with regards to the design of the museum.
Yes.
Just how the design process came about, if it was open to an architectural competition, or was Calatrava your go-to architect? Yes. Also, what the dialogue was like between the museum as a client, let's say, and the architect, and the requirements for the design.
Of course.
Thank you.
There was no competition. At that time, by choosing the architect, the mayor of Rio, he had the power to decide. He could have done like an international competition, but he wanted to have something very iconic in the city of Rio, a new icon, a new landmark for the city of Rio de Janeiro. So I remember we had on the table 3 major superstar architects, Rem Koolhaas, Santiago Calatrava, and Renzo Piano. And they simply decided for, it was a really top-down decision, like decided for Calatrava. I do not agree with that type of decision-making, but I think it works really well because a lot of people just go to the museum because they're simply curious and attracted by this sculpture in the city. So, yeah. And the second question was about the relationship between the architect and Calatrava said something that was really an insight for the curators of the museum, which was the 21st century science museums. They are the new cathedrals of knowledge. So he designed a cathedral of knowledge for the 21st century. And working with Calatrava, it's very challenging because everything that he does is extremely innovative, and it was extremely challenging to come up with that building. I don't know what else I can say. If you, do I answer? Okay, thank you.
No, one more.
Last one.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Definitely, I think museums are very important cultural icons and magnets, and they create conversations around subject matters. I think to bring it back to the subject of the creative economy, how does one quantify, and I'm going to be specific in a minute, how does one quantify the social value created or the enhancement in the value created in context of something like a museum? So yours is about $150 million. All museums, if you look at, they're about $200 million, $100 million, $150 million, talking about a lot of money.
Yeah.
So how does one translate that? And if I bring it down to the micro side, if you look at your annual KPIs, your social KPIs, what are some of the KPIs that you track?
Yes.
To quantify the 150 million? I mean, really, how do you quantify inspiration, right? If you inspired somebody to be the next Einstein, how can you quantify that? It's very difficult.
That's the $1 million question. But I think I think we are have a way that we show our KPIs. First is the hard numbers, right? How many visitors do you have? I mean, do you have your community engaged? How many members of that community are going to the museum or using the museum? So those are basic KPIs, visitors. How many exhibitions do you produce? Whenever you do an exhibition, a lot of jobs are involved, especially in a museum like this. And most recently, we are using artificial intelligence to do that. And okay, a lot of people went to the Museum of Tomorrow. And how can I measure some action, some impact, some action that he did that was good for the city of Rio, for their community? We basically, by the end of the main exhibition, we partnered with IBM Watson in order to establish a Socratic dialogue with each visitor. Meaning, we want to get like a superficial talk to a deeper level. We want to understand what are the concerns of that person. So for the first time, IBM Watson is able to formulate a question. And from that question, Watson links that person with initiative that's related to that concern. And if the visitor at least gets in touch with that initiative, and we're able to measure that, then we can see, okay, he at least he did one step further, which is to be in touch with that initiative that's related to his concern. So if your concern is about, I need more bicycles in my city, cyclomobility, it's my issue, I want to tackle that, what can I do to advocate for that or to contribute on that matter? And then we're able to see and present that, how many people are actually involved in that. And also how many, the economical impact of that we're able to measure because we're in touch with those initiatives that are tackling some of the concerns of the visitor. So this is a very important KPI that is really an eye-opener for our sponsors, our stakeholders, our board. Thank you. Thank you very much.